The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
With so many people living longer, the fear of outliving your money becomes a reality for many of us. Will I be a financial burden? Will I outlive my money? How will I be remembered? My name is Neil Himmelstein, president of Main Street Planning Group. Please contact me by visiting mainstreetplanninggroup.com. That's mainstreetplanninggroup.com, or call 631-647-4694. I will introduce you to strategies that will guarantee you will not outlive your money, that can guarantee you will not be a burden on your loved ones. Through a collaborative approach, we will uncover solutions that offer tax-efficient strategies, lifetime income, and legacy planning, choice, organization, direction, and education. That is the code we stand behind. Contact mainstreetplanninggroup.com, that's mainstreetplanninggroup.com, or call 631-647-4694. And listen to me every Friday at 3 p.m. as I host the Main Street Code for Financial Success, right here on 103.9 LI News Radio. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein, and we talk about our code. We talk about choice, organization, direction, and education. And we help hundreds of advisors across the United States, financial advisors, insurance advisors, attorneys, CPAs, with insurance issues, life insurance, long-term care, extended care issues, annuities, fixed annuities. We do a lot of this type of work for many organizations and people in helping you protect you for your retirement and post-retirement. And today, very happy to have with us Kurt Widmaier, who is an attorney who has his own show. Kurt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, Neil, and thank you for having me. This is Kurt Widmaier, and I have my own show here, thankfully, on Wednesdays, 4:30. It's called Plan Now, Win Later, and it's everything to do with estate planning.
Right.
So good morning.
And we work with a lot of estate planners, and one of the things that people have this new advisor, it's called Google. And they think they can do it themselves. And it's a problem for your profession, problem for my profession, and it's a problem for people who think they can do it themselves. You know, TurboTax, it's great, okay. But you know what? When you prepare a will, okay, and I know your expertise is wills, and we know lots of things can happen and whatnot. Some people think, first off, the biggest problem is people wait. Why are you waiting to do your will? And what kind of problems, you know? And you can't do it. You can't do it on the internet and do it yourself. And just talk about that just for a second.
Well, those are two really good points, Neil. When Johnny Cochran, as most of the listeners know, was a pretty famous attorney, he came after the Simpson case. He came up with like a LegalZoom.com. He was one of the financial backers, and his idea was to try to simplify and have the documents online. The joke out in my court, Surrogate's court, it's not a joke because it's a serious business, was that it's going to increase litigation tenfold, and in fact, it did. And Neil, what happened was, and you hit it perfectly there, is that people were doing it. They were waiting to the end, which is of course an issue in all of our businesses, right? A lot of people procrastinate, but they would do it online. But in New York, unlike some states, we have a significant formality and a protocol in which to do a will and power of attorneys and all the good, healthcare proxies and trust. And if those protocols and statutory requirements are not adhered to, it's an invalid document. So a lot of those LegalZoom.com, which was originally his company, I believe, and other ones, those documents, such as in the tax you just mentioned, TurboTax, might be great for, maybe a police officer or a teacher, somebody that W-2, straightforward. But if you have something out of the ordinary, maybe you don't want to do that type of tax return. Same thing in the law. We want to make sure that the wills are going to be upheld after you die. The at-home, do-it-yourself wills normally are not sufficient and aren't even statutorily correct. And you just reminded me, and I mentioned my show, Plan Now, Win Later. I was asking people, what do you think is a good name for the show? Like, Kurt, you always harp on people doing it sooner rather than later.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's really one of the key focuses of my practice.
Now, when you have a will, and, I'm an expert in life insurance, and, there's a whole thing about beneficiary thing we can get into. But when you have a will, if people don't know where your will is or it's not signed and documented, that will's invalid, correct?
That is correct. In New York State, it has to be signed, an original, in front of 2 disinterested witnesses. And it's always important for those listeners and clients that come in to make sure that they have the self-proving affidavit. The self-proving affidavit is a document attached to the will. It's part of the will that says the witnesses knew that the testator, the person doing the will, was over 18, could speak English, was competent. And this way, if the witnesses, who may be friends, maybe neighbors, maybe secretaries, whatever the case may be, if those people are missing or lost or passed away, the will is self-proving. It has to be original.
And notarized, correct?
The will itself has to be witnessed. The affidavit attached to the will has to be notarized. So what I do in my practice, every will is witnessed properly and notarized. And to your point about having copies or can't find it, what we do in my firm, we give the clients an option. We either keep the original in a fireproof safe system, which we've had since 1979, 1980. We have wills. Or we tell the clients, whatever you do, don't lose the will, but don't put it in a safe deposit box because then you need to get a court order. So we harp on the custody of the will.
Yeah, it's very important. And, I recently had a 57-year-old friend passed away like 2 weeks ago. And he didn't have a will. And first off, when they're younger, actually it's a little easier, but, he had 2 17-year-old kids getting ready to go to college. He had one kid that just graduated college. Another kid, so he had debt. He had student debt. He had more. The one saving grace is, and the one thing that always happens after death, I hate to talk about this, is everybody sitting there at the funeral going, geez, I hope he took care of his family. That's the one thing that happens. Nobody talks about it, but it's in everybody's freaking mind. And then there's this mad scramble to find this paperwork and to go through things. And thank God we found a life insurance policy, which is going to give his family $500,000 because, and it wasn't even a policy we found a statement. The attorney called me up and said, hey, Neil, can you check this out? Thank God he did the right thing. And without that, his family, his wife would have to keep working. I don't know how the kids were going to go to college or how they were going to keep the house even with the bills and everything that they've already built up. But thank God for that one saving grace. And I know this guy well. I knew him for 20 years. He used to be in the insurance business, so I never really went into his personal insurance with him. And I knew at 57, this was a sudden, amazing thing. Yes, he was overweight. Yes, he had diabetes. Yes, he probably had underlying health issues, which brings me to a whole nother point. But, at his age, with these health issues, could I even get him that kind of insurance? Would it even be affordable for him? Which is why we talk about planning at a younger age. I mean, you need to plan at a younger age because this is real life, man. This happens. Yeah. And thank goodness he had that policy. His family can stay in their house. They can live a normal life. They can do what they planned on doing. But without that life insurance policy, it's so huge. And, the other thing is, it was probably a term policy. I don't know. It was some wacky company. Whatever, we found it. Okay? And you know what? 2 years from now, when he hits 60, that policy may not even have been in effect anymore. And I'm sure you run into this all the time. And when you're doing your will, one of the things that when you speak to Kurt or you speak to me or you speak to is what they're going to do for you is do something, we call it a fact finder. We call it a thing. A lot of people don't even know where their assets are or what they're doing. Would you agree to that?
I was chuckling. First off, my condolences on your loss of your friend, because regardless of health issues, and if somebody's 57 and they have children in that vulnerable age, you're right. The first thing we say is we hope that they had their act together. And to that point, I tell clients who are younger and in their 20s, and I meet them, insurance has to be part of their estate plan. No brainer, got to do it, because and I know the younger you are, estate planner is easier, cheaper, and you have a basis at least. So on that point, I think that for all my listeners and all my clients, I always inquire as to insurance. And then when you get to be my age, at least in your mid-50s, right, because some of my old term policy is expiring, you have to reevaluate it. And like we talked before the show, I ask my client during that fact finding, the intake, we call it intake sheet that I send out is, do you have insurance policies that still make sense for you today? They may have made sense to you when you were 25, 30, 35 with young children, but maybe we're not so concerned with leaving tons of money in cash. Maybe we have long-term care issues, right? So during that fact finding, which you referred to, we call it the intake process. Insurance is such an important part. Can't overemphasize that.
It's huge. And this is something it's a huge issue. Anyhow, you're listening to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. We're going to be back, and my guest, Kurt Widmaier, how can they get a hold of you?
So thank you. My offices are throughout Long Island, but the phone number is 631-265-7200, or I can be reached at plannowwinlater.com. That's plannowwinlater.com.
And you can always reach me at 631-647-4694. Go to my website, mainstreetplanninggroup.com, and we're going to be right back with you right after a quick break. Thank you. Welcome back to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein. I can always reach me at 631-647-4694 or my website, mainstreetplanninggroup.com. And today we're here with Kurt Widmaier, a trust and estate attorney. Besides trust and estate, do you have a will? I mean, it's so important to have a will. But when we talk about the intake process, and people don't really know of all their assets, and one of the things that we look at when we're doing an intake process, or I like to call it a fact finder, is even if you do have insurance policies, are they well funded? Do you have term insurance policy? It's going to expire next year. Do you have life insurance policies? Who's the owner of the policy? If it's individually owned by you, or is it inside a life insurance trust? Very important ownership, because if you individually own the policy, it's part of your estate. It could actually create a tax problem for your heirs, even though the death benefit's tax-free, it's not estate tax-free. So it could actually create a problem. I recently, and I wanted to run this by Kurt because I think it's important, met with a gentleman who has been very successful. And very successful. He built a business. He now has 240 employees. He's in his 70s. When I met with him, he said he was in the middle of doing an estate plan with his attorney. I haven't met his attorney yet. And he disclosed to me that he has 7 or 8 insurance policies. And this is not uncommon. Things change in life. And, he's divorced. He's remarried. His son is now coming into the business. He wants his son to own the business. It's pretty complicated. But what upset me, and we're in the middle of the process, his attorney didn't even ask him about his insurance policies. Didn't even ask him what kind of insurance he had. And what's even worse is when I asked him about it, I go, who owns those policies? He says, I own them. The business bought some. And I know this guy's got an estate tax problem. He says, I got loans on some. I've got universal life. I got whole life. I don't know what I got. We get so busy in our lives doing and building a business and doing this. And even to his own admission, I'm so busy, I don't look at this stuff. And that's a problem. And it's a problem even if you've done your will and done proper planning at one point in your life. Things change. And if you don't change that beneficiary, one thing about a life insurance policy, and I've said this in programs in the past, the beneficiary of that life insurance policy could be somebody like an ex-wife, or it could be one of your children and you've left out the other 2 children. So if you haven't changed it, I don't care what kind of will planning you've done or anything else you've done, life insurance policies go by contract. Annuities go by contract. Annuities are offered by insurance companies. They go by contract, not by will. So it's very important when you do your intake and our fact finding that these things get reviewed. And what I suggest to Kurt, and before we got on the air here, and what I do with a lot of attorneys is when they're doing that intake process, have somebody look at all the different insurance policies you have and make sure that A, they're properly funded. B, they have the right beneficiaries. And 3, which Kurt looks at very strongly, is how are they owned?
So to that point, we take the idea of the intakes process from my perspective is to get a snapshot of a person's life and then quickly evaluate it. But I always say to the client, do you have other professionals? Do you have a CPA that you're comfortable with? Do you have an insurance professional, financial professional? I welcome and want to work with them because that's what they know. I know the law. I know how to draft. I know estates. I know estate litigation. I know all the things with estates, but I'm not an insurance professional. I'm not an accountant. So we always say, let's get them involved in the process. But when I do my intake, there is a whole provision for all of your insurances. All the insurance I've ever owned in my life, even from my early 20s, has been owned by a trust. I have an ILIT. It's called an irrevocable life insurance trust because I learned very early. I had the luxury of being an intern in the firm in the 1980s when the estate tax issue was the big raging issue. Back in 85 is when I started. I was like, wow, what is this estate tax thing? You mean we get taxed when we die? I couldn't believe it. So I've always had insurance in a trust. But let me tell you, Neil, one of the things that I see all the time for younger clients, you mentioned your friend who was 57 before the break. I say to the client, so who's your beneficiary? Well, of course, my wife. I go, okay, very good. And who's your contingent beneficiary?
Right.
My children. I'll say, how old are your children? Well, 12, 14, and 18. Then I ask them, this beneficiary trumps the will. Right? So if you have a will and you'd like to stagger the payment and maybe till they're 30 with a trustee who's fiscally responsible, you have to make sure that those bennies, those beneficiary forms are dovetailed and match, right?
100%.
And that is something you see with the younger clients. The older clients, I ask them, you have this the whole life policy, you have a loan on it, you have cash. Do you still think you need that for the purpose you took it 30 years ago, or you have other concerns, maybe like long-term care? And that's when I tell them to get in touch with people like yourself, because I know enough to say, look, these are the issues and things change, but you have to sit down with the professional.
Right. And not only do our lives change, there's external factors that change. How often does the estate tax law change?
Oh, good Lord.
How often does the Medicare laws change and transferring change? We've had multiple changes, and we're anticipating a change now when the new government came into office, when Biden came into office. One of the big things on the table was changing the estate tax. Now, they're going to take it down from where it is. Now, they were proposing going down to $3 million and $5 million. It's currently at 11.6 million per 11 point.
Yeah, with inflation, it's 12 million, 16,000, 12 million, but you're right.
But it sunsets, when does it sunset?
Well, right now, 2025, I believe still. There's going to be a reevaluation.
So 2025, it goes back to where it was.
We're not sure what that's going to be.
So we don't know. So if you're not changing your will, if you're not looking at this, and the problem with, I'm going to say, most attorneys and most insurance professionals and most people is they'll buy something, they'll set it and forget it, but things change and it has to be reviewed. And the problem is, for attorneys and for insurance people and for investment people, they'll visit with you and then they'll go on to the next person. Well, unless you're diligent, and I blame them as well, but maybe it's you as well that you're not following, they may call you and to follow up and to go over things, and you're like, oh, no, I'm covered, I'm set. You're never set. Your life changes. It evolves. Listen, in a heartbeat, we're now in an inflationary rate of 8%, where 3 months ago, we were in the lowest inflationary period in our lifetime. And we were for 10 years. And then all of a sudden, we got massive inflation. And what else do we have? We have interest rates rising like crazy. Okay, 5.35 for a new mortgage is the average, 30-year mortgage. A couple months ago, it was 2.5, 3. Now it's 5.5. What does that mean? Is your money going to keep up with inflation? I talk about this all the time. You need to protect your money, and you need to protect your money against inflation, and you need to prepare with annuities and different things that are going to cover you for inflation, not sitting stagnant in a bank making nothing, okay, and being taxed on it. So you have to be tax efficient, and you have to be evolved in all these different things. And I encourage to sit with other professionals. I always ask everybody in my fact finding, like you do, in your intake, who are the other professionals you work with? And if you don't have a team behind you, we'll help create a team for you. And that's what we do. If you don't have a team, we'll help you create a team, because I think it's very important that I know what Kurt's doing with your document and he knows what I'm doing with your insurance document. Okay? And we need to know what the investment guy's doing with your investments. And if those three people aren't meeting and your CPA aren't meeting and discussing and helping you, or you are not, let us help you put that together, because that's the element of planning, is having all three prongs: being tax efficient, being protected, and having the right legal work that's going to help you throughout your life and retirement, and help you avoid arguments between your people that you want to leave your assets behind to. So you're listening to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. You can always hear me every Friday at 3 o'clock here at 103.9. And our guest, Kurt, you can get a hold of me at 631-647-4694 and listen to Kurt's show. When's your show?
Wednesdays at 4:30. And thank you very much, Neil. Great topic. And thank you to the listeners.
You got it. Have a great day, everybody. Have a beautiful weekend. Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.